Before we begin, just a quick reminder, if you enjoy this kind of content, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. It's just a quick click for you, but it means the world to me and really helps the channel grow. And since I'm no longer on social media, sharing this video is the best way to help spread the word. So if you like what you see, please share it far and wide. And now, let's get started. Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Hocus Focus. I'm Sarah Mondaini, and as you can see, it's just me hosting the main show here on my channel now. But don't worry, Thomas is still over on Beyond Room 313, so if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to his channel because he's got some great stuff going on over there. And Thomas and I have had an amazing 2 years working together, and I've enjoyed collaborating with him very much. However, as life has a habit of doing, our commitments have made it much harder to line up with our schedules. So rather than letting that affect the show, we've decided I'll take the reins solo on my channel. And I've made a few changes to help streamline things. So rather than juggling lots of different segments and people, I'll be focusing on one specific topic each episode, giving us a chance to have a good look into the weird and wonderful that's out there. And I think this will make for a much better show. And I really hope you'll enjoy my new approach and continue to support my channel. Now, I'm going to admit that stepping out on my own feels a little bit daunting, but I'm up for it, and I'll be sharing more of my personal thoughts and experiences and adding a bit more of my own flavour into the mix. And as always, I'd love to hear from you. So please feel free to drop your thoughts in the comments, share your own experiences, or let me know what you'd like to see in future episodes. Your support means the world, and I'm so grateful to have you guys here. Now, as a precursor to tonight's topic, I've recently rewatched the TV series Lost and Stranger Things, and both shows have a hauntological feel to them. They're full of nostalgia, abandoned places, and many of the characters are haunted by their pasts. Now, in Stranger Things, the entire series is the aesthetic and nostalgia for the 1980s, but not just the retro pop culture references. It also brings in the small town setting of Hawkins, and there's a chief of police, a shadowy government, there's a Cold War backdrop, flickering neon lights, and a brilliant synth soundtrack, which I think is very much inspired by John Carpenter. The whole show has a John Carpenter feel to it. I think the writers are big fans. There's clunky technology, and it all goes towards looking into a past time that's still very strong in our present imagination. And the upside down is like a metaphor for the ghosts of the past, the repressed fears and the other world that exists beneath the surface of our own small town normality of popular culture and shopping malls. And then there's Lost, which takes a different hauntological approach. The island is a liminal space full of electromagnetic anomalies, and the characters confront their past lives through flashbacks. And no matter how hard they try, their past refuses to stay buried. And they're not haunted by traditional ghosts, they're haunted by their regrets, the choices, and their personal histories. And the remains of the Dharma Initiative, which are the abandoned stations and VHS tapes and machines, obsolete computers, they're all artifacts frozen in time, but they're still influencing the present. So, in tonight's episode, I'm talking about hauntology, and it's a term coined by the philosopher Jacques Derrida in his 1993 book, Spectres of Marx. Now, hauntology is the idea that the past never truly disappears, it haunts the present like a ghost. And he used this concept to discuss how ideologies like Marxism linger and continue to influence the world, even when they've been declared obsolete. And it could also describe that feeling that you get when you hear a song from your childhood or stumble across an old toy in the attic. Hauntologies are personal ghost stories, but not in the traditional sense, because sometimes the ghosts aren't people, sometimes they're ideas, places, and objects. There's definitely something very haunting about abandoned places. Spaces that were once filled with life and laughter and purpose that have been left to decay in silence. And it could be the crumbling remains of a once busy shopping centre or a ghost town, forgotten areas of our own neighbourhoods, boarded up shops and houses, overgrown gardens, disused railway tracks. They're all in a liminal space between the past and the present, frozen in time but still decaying. And they remind us of what once was, of hopes and dreams that never fully came to pass, and how quickly things can change and can be left behind. Let's take abandoned shopping malls. They were spaces designed for consumerism and community. They were meant to be bustling hubs where people gathered and socialised and, well, consumed. But now, with online shopping and changing social habits, they've become time capsules. Nowadays, when you're walking through them, you can still hear in your mind all the hustle and bustle of people from times gone by. But all that's there are a handful of vape shops, a whole lot of boarded up shops, and lots of old neon signs. And you can't help but feel the ghost of a time when they were the heart of suburban life. And in a way, they are ghosts of what once mattered, but are no longer relevant. Now, for me, one of the strongest examples of the hauntology of place is the Pripyat amusement park. Pripyat was a planned city built in 1970 to house workers and their families from the nearby Chernobyl nuclear power plant. It was a model Soviet city. It was modern, efficient, and full of optimism for the future. And at its peak, nearly 50,000 people lived there. And as part of this vision of progress, the authorities built the Pripyat amusement park. Located in the heart of the city, it was designed for families and children, a space where they could come together and enjoy leisure time. The park was small but carefully designed, with a towering Ferris wheel, a bumper car arena, swing boats, and a classic carousel for the younger children. And it was supposed to open on May the 1st, 1986 for the May Day celebrations, but it never did. Because just days before, the Chernobyl disaster turned Pripyat into a ghost town, and instead of joy and laughter, the park became a silent witness to one of history's darkest moments, frozen in time, never fulfilling the purpose that it was built for. Amusement parks are meant to be places of joy and celebration, which makes it all the more eerie when one is left to rot. The bright yellows of the Ferris wheel are now rusting and faded against the greyness of a ghost town. And it's haunting, it's uncomfortable. And the bumper cars are all still lined up waiting for riders, but they're now covered in moss and debris, and they've been forgotten by time and stuck in a psychic freeze. And Pripyat isn't just a place, it's a memory of ghosts of what could have been, of how quickly everything can change in an instant. And if anyone wants to experience the hauntology of place, then go and have a look at the Pripyat amusement park online, both before it opened and now. It's one of the clearest examples of the hauntology of place. In folklore, liminal spaces are doorways or crossroads and thresholds where the usual rules of reality don't quite apply. And I reckon that in our time, abandoned places, such as closed down shopping malls or even the Pripyat amusement park, feel like portals to the past. But it's not just their physical presence that hangs around, it's the memories and nostalgia that they stir up. And these places were once sold to us as symbols of progress and modernity, promises of a brighter future. But when you see them now, left to decay, they're not progress, they're just failed ventures, ghosts of corporate pipe dreams that never really had any substance to begin with. I've been thinking a lot lately about our obsession with retro trends and things that we find in secondhand shops. And it's funny how we keep coming back to retro and analog, things like vinyl records, Polaroid cameras, vintage clothing, and we tell ourselves it's just aesthetics, but it's more than that. Back in the day, the future felt so full of promise. There was rounded edges of space age tech, the idea of jetpacks and flying cars by the year 2020, things that shows like Tomorrow's World promised were just around the corner, and all those early computers with their bright colours and strange futuristic bleeps. Now, these weren't just shiny gadgets, they were symbols of progress and prosperity and a future that was exciting. But now, most of that futuristic tech sits abandoned in museums, second-hand shops, or gathering dust in our attics and storage rooms. Once they were cutting edge, but just like the Pripyat amusement park, these gadgets now feel like relics, stuck in time. And they're not just obsolete, they've become ghosts of modernity. Now I know a lot of you watching can relate to the memory of flicking through the Argos catalogue or the Sears catalogue if you're in the US or Canada and circling off what you wanted for Christmas or what you'd save up for. Walkmans, Atari consoles, boomboxes, portable TVs, ZX Spectrums. I went through them all, and it's hard not to feel a pang of nostalgia for a time when we truly believed the future was brighter. Which brings me back to the TV show Lost and the Dharma Initiative stations from the show. When you first see them, they reflect that same space age optimism. The Dharma Initiative was all about science, progress, and human advancement, cracking the mysteries of the universe with the right technology and the brightest minds. And the stations were packed with futuristic tech. Again, chunky monitors, blinking lights, reel to reel tape machines, and VHS players. But eventually, the Dharma stations became decayed, abandoned. They no longer represented progress. They were haunting parts of a dream that failed spectacularly. And yet, what's even more haunting is how they still function. There's even an old computer that requires a sequence of numbers to be entered every 108 minutes to save the world. Seriously, if you haven't watched Lost, you're missing out on some brilliant TV. And when the current inhabitants of the island look at the fictional Dharma stations, the optimism for the future has been replaced by nostalgia and a question. What happened? Why didn't we get the future we were promised? VHS tapes, old mobile phones, and floppy disks were once cutting edge, part of our everyday lives, but now they're relics. And whenever I come across an old VHS tape, I'm instantly transported back to when my parents bought their first Betamax player sometime around 1979 or 1980. And it came with an instructional tape, one of those futuristic guides that explained all the amazing things that the machine could do. And I remember it so vividly, even though I was just a child. And the tape featured Tim Brooke Taylor from the Goodies. And for some reason, that memory has always stuck with me. And of course, while researching this episode, I had to do a quick search to see if I could find any trace of that video online, but unfortunately, nothing turned up. And I still remember the awe that my parents had for that machine, and they were amazed by it. And then the timer feature completely baffled them at first, and there was quite a few mishaps like taping the wrong program or missing a start of something important. But every time I see an old videotape now, it brings all of that back. And it's funny how an object as small as a VHS tape can hold so much nostalgia, isn't it? Analog technology is an important part of hauntology, and there's something about the crackle of a vinyl record or the wobble of a cassette tape that feels like it's holding the memory of every time it was played. Unlike digital tech, which is all clean lines and precision, analog feels more human, it's imperfect, and it's real, and it takes you back to when engaging with media was deliberate, almost ritualistic. And I remember Friday nights going to the video shop to pick out a movie or sometimes three if it was one of those rent three for two deals for the weekend. And I'd choose my snacks, maybe a drink, and then head home and set it all up, pop the video in the machine, and it felt like a proper event, a real night out, but at home. And streaming services don't have that same magic. You can't hold the film in your hand, feel the weight of it, read the back cover for all the details, so it's less personal and less tangible. And of course, there was the ritual of rewinding the tape before you returned it back to the video shop. It was a small thing, but it sticks in your memory. And back then, you didn't need the internet to enjoy a movie, just your analog TV and a clunky video cassette player. And I myself am a total sucker for retro trends. It's funny, the things that we tossed aside as outdated have somehow made a comeback. And I think there's something very comforting about these objects, and they make us slow down in a way that modern technology just can't. Like vinyl records, for instance, you can't just skip around or scroll endlessly like you would on a digital playlist. You have to sit with it, listen to the whole album, and really experience the music the way it was meant to be heard. And there's a level of care involved as well, because you have to look after the vinyl, or eventually it won't play properly. And constant skipping and moving the needle too much wears it down. And anyone who ever had a cassette tape will remember the dreaded moment when it got chewed up from too much fast forwarding and rewinding, and then you were frantically winding it back with a pencil in the hole. It's the hands on experience, the responsibility that you have for caretaking these things that makes them special. They require patience, attention, and respect. And it's something that feels quite rare today, where everything is instant and disposable. And then there's those quirky little things that we find in second-hand shops, toys and handbags and bric-a-brac, old books, and again, records, even CDs. And once they were brand new and cherished. And you remember how it was back in the day, buying a new album. It was a proud moment. You'd saved up your money or your pocket money, and finally you bought it. And you carried it home on the bus, tucked under your arm, so everyone could see how cool you were and what great taste you had in music. And there was a pride in it, a satisfaction. And it wasn't just records. Anything you bought new back then was an event. You thought it through, you saved, and when you finally made the purchase, it was with longevity in mind. But now those things bought from the past sit there in charity shops or vintage shops, just forgotten. Who did they belong to, and what stories could they tell if they could speak? And what hopes and dreams did their owners have when they first brought them home? These items also exist in this strange liminal space I spoke about, but in this case, the charity shop, or the antique shop, or the junk shop, no longer wanted or needed, yet still here hanging around, waiting. There is something haunting about it. They sit on the shelves waiting to be picked up and rehomed, ready to stir up memories in somebody else and become part of a new story. And I think that's part of the attraction with secondhand treasures. Sometimes you buy them for the function, but more often than not, it's the feeling that they give you. A connection to a time gone by or a place, and it's comforting to know that these objects had a life before they came to you, and maybe, just maybe, they still got a bit of magic left in them. So why can't we seem to let go of these things? Is it just nostalgia, the fear of forgetting, or of losing pieces of ourselves, our hopes and dreams? I suppose, in a way, they offer a sense of continuity because we live in a time that is increasingly fleeting and more digital, and everything now is so temporary. Music streams in and out of our lives, photographs live in the clouds instead of photo albums, and even our thoughts get lost in endless scrolling. But with a physical object, that's something real, a vinyl record, an old book, a favourite jumper. They stay put. They have our fingerprints on them, our DNA, and they wear their history and they don't just disappear with the next software update. Maybe that's why we hold on to them. They give us a sense of permanence and reassurance. Hauntology also brings that wanting to return to the simplicity of an earlier time, the Saturday mornings spent watching cartoons when the world felt so much bigger and brighter. And lately, I've been spending a lot of time on the Internet Archive, borrowing material from my childhood, and I've been rereading the comics that I used to get and those old school reading books that I loved, like Wide Range Readers. And I've been reading old issues of Smash Hits magazine from the late 70s and early 80s, and it's been a proper trip down memory lane. I even stumbled across a book I hadn't thought about in decades called Grumble's Yard and Widdershins Crescent by John Rowe Townsend. And the moment I saw it, I was transported straight back to 1982. I remembered being in the bedroom, and E.T. had just come out, and I had a little rubber E.T. figure thingy sitting proudly on top of the record player. I was listening to Kissing to Be Clever by Culture Club, and that book was sitting on my bedside table because I loved reading in bed as a child. I still do. Just seeing that book again, though, 40 years later, brought all those 1982 memories flooding back to me in an instant. The present is sometimes overwhelming. It's too fast and too impersonal, too disposable, and that's why so many of us turn to the styles and ideas of earlier times instead. Vintage clothing and retro aesthetics, and old fashioned hobbies like knitting or baking, because they give us an anchor in time, and they allow us to reject the coldness of the modern world in favour of something slower, something more meaningful. It's a quiet rebellion against a culture that insists that we keep up with the latest thing, we keep up with the Joneses, when what we really want is something timeless and real. So I've talked about the hauntology of places and objects, and now I want to talk about ideals and trends, because Just because a belief or a trend has been declared dead doesn't mean it's truly gone, because some ideas and trends continue to haunt us. Outdated traditions, political ideologies, or familiar media tropes that we just can't seem to escape. Ideas don't rust or crumble like abandoned places. They resurface, rebrand, and quietly influence us again in ways that we don't always notice. Think about cultural norms such as societal expectations and traditions that we've supposedly outgrown. We like to think we've moved on, that we're more progressive and open minded, but these ideas still have a way of shaping our subconscious, our behaviours, and the pressure to conform is still somehow policed by society, and these ghosts of past ideologies continue to hang around in our present under new disguises. Even in advertising and social media, these old expectations creep in. The pressure to look a certain way, the idea that success only comes in certain forms. The messages might be delivered differently, but they still haunt us, influencing the way we think about ourselves and each other, whether we're aware of it or not. Political hauntology is the so called death of ideologies that refuse to stay buried. Socialism, post industrial dreams, the grand utopian vision of the future that we were promised in the mid 20th century. We're told they're outdated, impossible, or irrelevant, but they never quite go away. They stick around in political rhetoric. We see it all the time when politicians evoke nostalgia for a bygone era by promising to bring back industries that have been destroyed or restore values that never really existed the way we remember them. So much of our media is haunted by the fear of the future and the longing for the past. Dystopian fiction tells us what could go wrong if we don't change our ways, while period dramas present an idealised version of the past that never really existed. It's all very hauntological, and these ideals are not truly gone. They're here, haunting us in politics and pop culture. The way people decorate their homes, the way they vote, the ghosts of the past are always there. Now, Christmas music is such a perfect example of hauntology. Those Christmas songs carry so much weight over the years that they collect layer upon layer of memories, emotions, and associations like psychic strata building up over time. And every time we hear them, they remind us not just of Christmases gone by, but also the people we were, the moments that we went through, and sometimes things that we'd rather forget. And as each year passes, these songs take on more meaning. And sometimes hearing a Christmas song is comforting, but for many people, they can be unbearable, bringing up memories of terrible times that they've tried hard to forget. And these songs never really go away. Every year, they're re released, played on the radio, piped into shops all throughout the season. They are ghosts that return every December, bringing all those memories flooding back, whether it's a happy memory or a painful one. The songs won't let you escape. They haunt you, whether you want them to or not. If you grew up in Britain in the 1970s or 80s, you'll probably remember the visceral terror of public service announcements. And they came across as friendly safety messages, but underneath, a lot of them were very traumatizing. And if you watch them now, they bring back creepy feelings of childhood fear. There were some absolutely terrifying ones out there, like the electricity pylon public service announcement, the one with the kids playing with a kite or a frisbee near the pylon line, and then cut to the devastated parents and a voiceover that made it sound like the Grim Reaper himself had written the script. And as a child, it was enough to make you terrified of even looking at a pylon. And the water safety ads also were pure horror film material. I remember it had this black robed figure lurking at the water's edge waiting to drag you in, and it was like they weren't even trying to sugarcoat it. It's no wonder these PSAs stick in our minds even today. But if those weren't bad enough, they get even creepier than that, because some of these public service announcements were presented by none other than Jimmy Savile. And at the time, he was this trusted TV personality, seen as a kind of weird uncle figure. But now, knowing what we do know about who he was, watching those PSAs again is genuinely disturbing. This was a man warning kids about the dangers of strangers, while at the same time being one of the most prolific predators in British history. I want to show you some of these safety PSAs so you can experience the hauntological feeling that I'm trying to describe. So, take, for example, the Charlie Says public service announcements. These were meant to teach kids basic safety. Don't go off with strangers, don't play with matches, but they did it in the weirdest way. And if you remember these from childhood, or if you're seeing them for the first time, pay close attention to how they make you feel through their use of the strange, distorted music and the creepy animation, and Charlie the cat's garbled, nightmarish voice, and how they use a friendly voice to induce psychological terror and horror to make everyday dangers feel like impending doom. This is Hauntology in action.
One day when my dad went fishing, he took Charlie and me along. While he was fishing, we started having fun with the puddles. Dad shouted, "Come back here!" But just then, Charlie tried to do an extra big jump, and he went over the edge and into the water. Charlie nearly drowned. It was very lucky for him, he caught on the line. Charlie says next time we go fishing, we should stay very close to Dad where he can look after us. And he hopes that when you go near the water, you'll stay close to a grown-up too. Charlie and I were out the back when Vera and Dave came by and said, "Come along for a picnic." And I was going, but Charlie said, he says I better tell Mum where I'm going. So we told him to wait while we went and asked. But Mum was talking to the milkman. And she talked such a long time that when I had asked her and she'd said yes, the others had gone. Mum asked us why we hadn't gone, and when I told her, she said we'd been good for not going, and would we like a day out with her instead? Charlie says, always tell your mummy before you go off somewhere, so she knows who you are with.
Go on, get it.
We're not supposed to go in there.
Oh, go on, there's a gap down there. A gang of kids broke in yesterday. I saw them.
Pass me that bit of wood.
A 66,000-volt shock killed a boy today when he broke into a substation. The electricity board warns children to keep away from substations. Never try to get toys back yourself. Otherwise, you may not live to play with them again.
This is what happened one day when the ice cream van stopped by Tufty's house. Ice cream! And Tufty goes to find his mummy. Tufty always asks his mummy to go with him to the ice cream van. But Willie Weasel has gone off to get an ice cream by himself. Oh, dear! Oh, Mummy! Willie has been knocked down by a car. Now Willie has been hurt. And all because he didn't ask his mummy to go with him to the ice cream van. When you want to go to the ice cream van, always take Mummy with you.
Hauntology is also about how governments have used psychological terror in such a way that it's still buried within our collective memory. The 20th century was full of government-backed PSAs, all designed to manipulate, instill fear and control public behaviour, and they did it through slogans and jingles and imagery, as we've already seen, that managed to worm its way into people's thoughts. One of the best examples of this kind of psychological manipulation was the infamous TV detector van. These PSAs made it seem like the government had some kind of high-tech device that could scan homes and instantly tell if you had an unlicensed television and even what you were watching. And it played on people's paranoia and the fear of being watched, making people believe that they could be caught at any moment in their own homes. Of course, we know now that the whole thing was nonsense. The vans couldn't detect anything because the technology simply didn't exist. It was all a psychological trick, a way to control people through fear. But even knowing that now, those old PSAs still make us feel uneasy. They make you feel guilty, even if you hadn't done anything wrong. The power of a well-crafted piece of propaganda just doesn't disappear. It sticks around in the back of your mind like a ghost in the machine. Have a look at this.
Yes, there's a TV set on number 5. It's in the front room. And they're watching Columbo.
If you don't have a TV license, it won't take us long to find you.
But if there's one set of PSAs that captures hauntology, then it's the nuclear attack warnings, the Protect and Survive campaign in Britain, much like Duck and Cover in the US, was designed to help the public prepare for a nuclear strike. But let's be honest here, there was no preparing for one. These weren't really instructional videos, they were government-approved terror to remind you of a threat. They told you to hide under a table, tape up your windows, sit in your makeshift fallout shelter and just wait. But they never told you what next. They never explained that in reality, survival would be unlikely, that the whitewashed windows wouldn't stop the radiation creeping in. It wasn't about survival, it was about control and making people feel like they were doing something, when really there was nothing they could do. Now have a look at this one and see what hauntological memories this particular odious PSA stirs up in you.
A warning may come quite unexpectedly. We will now tell you what to do if a warning sounds when you are at home. And then we will explain what to do if you are out of doors. First, if you are at home. If attack is imminent, you will hear the attack sound like this. So take cover at once. Send your young children to the fallout room, then go quickly and turn off the gas and the electricity at the mains. Close down stoves. Damp down fires. Shut windows. And draw curtains. Then go to your fallout room and stay there. If the fallout warning sounds are heard, they will be like these. You should now move yourself and your family to the safest area in your fallout room. That is, you should get inside your inner refuge and stay there. After 2 days, the danger from fallout will get less, but don't take any risks by contact with it. The longer you stay in your refuge, the better it will be for you. Listen to your radio. Stay where you are and keep listening to your radio. Now, this is what you should do if you are out of doors when the warning sounds. Take cover at once when you hear the attack sound. If you cannot reach home in 10 minutes, take cover in the nearest building. If there is no building nearby, try to find some solid cover. If there is no solid cover, lie flat in a ditch or a hole and cover your head, face and hands as fast as you can with some of your clothes. If you hear the fallout warning, seek the nearest and best cover as quickly as you can. But before entering the building or cover, brush or shake off any fallout dust you may have picked up and get rid of it. Change your outer clothing if you can. Stay under cover. When the all clear sounds, like this, it means that you are safe from attack or fallout for the time being, and that you can go out again. But keep listening for further warnings, or to your radio for further advice.
And then you've got the slogans, the jingles, the little earworms designed to manipulate people's thoughts without people even realising it. Clunk, click, every trip. Protect and survive. Your country needs you. Always short, punchy, repetitive phrases designed to get inside your head, and even decades later, they're still inside our heads, affecting the way we think about the past. And that's why they're hauntological, because they don't live in the past, they exist now. Forgotten until reminded, but still there in our minds, bringing up those same feelings.
It's very likely that 400 of you will be injured in your cars tomorrow. You'll be within 6 miles of home and doing less than 30.
And it's going to happen to a lot of you ladies.
You'll be shopping, collecting the kids, going to the laundrette.
Some of you, the face you start out with in the morning won't be the same face you end up with by the evening.
Why let it happen? Clunk, click, it's so simple. Clunk the car door, click the seat belt, even if you are just going round the corner, clunk, click every trip.
And even today, when we know those TV detector vans were fake, when we know that crouching under a table or a bridge wouldn't have saved us from nuclear war, the feelings still come to the surface when we watch those old PSAs, and that is everyday hauntology for you. We tend to think of ghosts as the dead that exist in old houses, creepy ruins, or ghost stories, but ghosts are everywhere. They're in places that we walk past every day, the objects that we hold on to, and the digital traces that we leave behind. These are what I like to call our everyday ghosts, the pieces of our lives that hang around. Sometimes it's unnoticeable, and sometimes it screams for our attention. I don't know about you, but I have certain things I just can't bring myself to get rid of. Old birthday cards and trinkets from holidays from a long time ago. Even a scarf that belonged to my nan. Now, they're not valuable in the traditional sense, but they hold memories, and in a way, they haunt me, reminding me of times and people that feel both near and far away at the same time. Everyday ghosts aren't just physical, they can be digital too, because social media is filled with ghosts, old profiles that we haven't updated in years, blogs that we've abandoned, messages from people we've lost. The internet has become like a kind of graveyard filled with parts of our former selves. Have you ever stumbled across an old profile and felt like you were looking at a stranger? It's weird, isn't it? Because they show us who we were and how we thought and what we cared about. And sometimes it's hard to recognise that with who we are now. And it's not just our own past that lingers around online. We also interact with the digital afterlife of others, like revisiting a loved one's social media after they've passed, or AI-generated voices recreating the dead. And these ghosts are always just a click away. We interact with these everyday ghosts all the time, sometimes consciously, sometimes without even realising it. That song that instantly takes you back to your teenage years, the smell of an old book that reminds you of your childhood home, even the way we decorate our homes with vintage furniture or wear clothes inspired by past decades, is all a way of keeping the past close. Maybe that's how we keep moving forward without losing who we are. And I think that holding on to the past is in our own way a form of resistance by refusing to be swept along by the relentless pace of modern life. We're constantly told by authorities, popular culture, and the media that we need to move on, upgrade, and keep up. But why should we? I hold on to these past items because I don't want to be constantly chasing after whatever's trending this month. I like to savor things and I like to take my time and really look after what I enjoy and make the most of it. And I think that's true for a lot of us, and why different objects, places, smells, and even ideals have sentimental value. They remind us of moments that mattered, of who we were, and of what we value. So holding on to the past is a way of moving forward on our own terms. And of course, no look into hauntology would be complete without looking at it from the ghost stories and horror films that we know and love. And ghost stories have always been about more than just things that go bump in the night. They're metaphors for trauma, unresolved regrets, and things we haven't quite dealt with yet. And in the same way, hauntology asks us what unresolved parts of our past are still with us. Classic ghost stories like The Woman in Black, The Turn of the Screw, or more modern tales like The Haunting of Hill House aren't just about ghosts floating around. They're also about grief and guilt and the past refusing to stay buried. And characters in the ghost stories can't move forward until they confront what's going on behind them. Modern hauntology has these same ideas as the old classic ghost stories. Society is haunted by history, failed promises, unresolved trauma, and it all comes down to one thing: unfinished business. And as individuals, or as societies, we can't move forward until we confront the ghosts of our past, whether that's personal regrets, cultural shifts, or unresolved history. And we've seen this wanting to reconnect with the past within the folk horror revival. Retromania, as I've already discussed, is everywhere, from fashion to film, and the resurgence of vinyl and cassette tapes, thinking back to a time when culture felt distinct and defined, whereas the folk horror revival goes into something much older, our deep-rooted connection to the land, our ancestors, and the folklore that shaped us. And folk horror is about the old ways hanging around beneath the surface and the idea that the past is never truly gone. Now, the original Wicker Man from 1973 is a perfect example of this. And on the surface, the island of Summerisle seems like an idyllic, self-sufficient community. But beneath that veneer is something far older, rooted in ancient traditions and rituals. Sergeant Howie arrives as a modern outsider, armed with logic and authority, only to find that the world he's stepped into plays by different rules. Older, primal rules that don't conform to his rigid Christian worldview. And folk horror thrives on that clash between the old and the new, the rational and the non-rational, that progress is an illusion, that beneath all our modernity, the past still has a hold on us. And Sergeant Howie never stood a chance because he didn't realise he was walking into something far bigger than himself. And it's the same with folk horror as a genre. It tells the stories through horror that no matter how much we try to push forward, old forces are waiting beneath the surface, ready to pull us back in. And while we're talking about folk horror, how can I not mention the stone tape theory, where physical places can hold on to memories, emotions, tragedies, and energies from the past? It's the ultimate hauntological concept, places replaying fragments of history like an old tape recording. And Nigel Neal's The Stone Tape from 1972 takes this idea and turns it into something more chilling. In the film, a group of researchers move into an old mansion, hoping to develop a new recording technology. But instead of blank tapes, they discover something else, an imprint of the past, trapped within the very walls of the building. And the researchers believe they've stumbled upon a scientific breakthrough, a way to record and replay things that have happened in history. But the deeper they dig, the more they realise that some memories are best left undisturbed. And what makes the stone tape so perfect is how it brings together rational, cutting edge science with something far older, something more primal, folkloric. The idea that buildings and walls and stones themselves can absorb trauma and play it back isn't just a ghost story. It's a way of understanding hauntings, that the supernatural might not be supernatural at all, something real, something within the stone of a place waiting to be triggered. To finish up this huge topic, of which I've only scratched the surface, I think one of the most fascinating things about hauntology is how it highlights the cultural stagnation. Do you remember there was a time when each decade had its own personality, and you could instantly tell the 80s from the 90s or the 60s from the 70s just by the music and the fashion and the cultural shifts? But now it's like we're stuck somewhere, probably stuck around the year 2002, I would say. 20 years ago was 2005, but there really isn't much of a difference between then and now. And compare that to the 20 years from 1985 to 2005. It was a time that saw massive shifts in music, fashion, technology, and even the way we lived. It feels like an entire world changed in that 20 years, and now everything just seems to mix together. And I think back a lot now to how distinct the eras used to feel, the decades used to feel. And I remember being blown away by new wave and punk because it felt so modern and fresh to me and something completely new. The music, the attitude, the look, it was electric. And I love groups like Soft Cell and Blondie in Japan, Visage, that whole new romantic scene that came out of the Blitz nightclub in London. It was daring and theatrical, and it was totally different from anything before it. And I think trends move so fast now that nothing has time to settle down. We don't give things the chance to define an era anymore, and everything ends up feeling like a mashup of what's come before. And we're sort of stagnating in the nostalgia instead of creating something new. I mean, the 80s felt like such a break from what came before it. It chased away the browns and the florals of the 70s with neon colours and sharp angles and geometric patterns, and you could see the shift happening during the crossover period of 1979 to 1981. Fashion, music, even the way people carried themselves, it all had a distinctive forward looking vibe. So, hauntology helps explain why so many of us feel stuck in time. We can't quite pinpoint where we are or where we're heading because the present doesn't feel defined anymore. The decades don't feel different, they just blend into each other. And for me, I like to stay grounded in things from the past because the present just doesn't seem to feel real like it used to. If today's discussion on hauntology has sparked your interest and you want to go further into it, there's loads of fascinating books and films and online resources to look at. There's stuff about the philosophical roots of hauntology, the cultural impact, the ghostly aesthetics, all of it. So I've compiled some recommendations to help you go further into it. First up, if you want to get to the very heart of hauntology, you have to start with the man himself, Jacques Derrida. His book, Spectres of Marx, is where the term hauntology was first introduced, and he talks about the ghosts of political ideas, how ideologies, even when declared dead, continue to shape our world. It's a thick book, it's philosophical, but if you want to understand the foundation of hauntology, then it's a must read. For a more modern take, Mark Fisher's Ghosts of My Life looks at hauntology through music, film, and pop culture, and looks at how we're haunted by lost futures, the dreams of what could have been, but never quite materialised. And if you've ever felt that sense of nostalgia for something you can't quite name, this book will resonate with you. And if you're more interested in the folklore and history behind our fascination with ghosts, The Haunted, A Social History of Ghosts by Owen Davies is a brilliant resource, and it goes into the evolution of ghost stories and how they've been used to process cultural anxieties and why certain ghostly tropes never quite disappear from the collective imagination. And of course, hauntology isn't just something that we read about, it's something we see in the world around us. And urban decay photography is one of the best ways to experience hauntology visually. And there's so many blogs and channels about abandoned places that were once full of life, but are now frozen in time. You can also find some fascinating articles on the resurgence of retro trends in the media and design, and why we're so obsessed with vintage aesthetics and how brands use nostalgia to keep us connected to the past. And if you want to see hauntology in pop culture, films like High Rise and Blade Runner 2049 are great examples because they create worlds where the dystopian present is haunted by the past. Now, High Rise is like a vision of the future imagined in the 1970s, yet it never quite moves beyond that aesthetic and the architecture and the faded glamour and the collapsing social order. It's all covered in a sense of a future that never arrives, and the characters exist in a kind of limbo, clinging to the outdated ideals of progress while their own world literally falls apart around them. And then there's Blade Runner 2049, which is full of hauntology in every frame, and it has a futuristic cityscape haunted by the ruins of what came before it. Lots of hauntological aesthetics with neon lights flickering over abandoned buildings, old tech that's still around, and everything has a worn out second-hand feel, like the future's been built on top of lost hope. And both films come from the angle that the past isn't influencing the present, it's suffocating it, because the future, which was sold as something shiny and new, is in reality nothing more than a distortion of the past. And if you have any favourite books, films, or blogs related to hauntology, please drop them in the comments and keep the conversation going. I'd love to hear about them, and very often the comments can provide a wealth of further information for people. So please light that comment section up with your thoughts and hauntological suggestions. Oh, well, we've come to the end of my first solo episode, and I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed putting it together for you. Now, if you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future content. And because I'm no longer on social media, I need to ask you a little favour, and that is that if you enjoyed tonight's episode, please like and share the video, because you guys are my only form of advertising now. So every share, every mention, every recommendation really does make a difference, and I appreciate every single view, every share and every subscription. It all helps me to keep this going. So, until next time, thank you for being here, for watching, for supporting. Take care, stay strange, and good night.
Oh, I do like to be beside the seaside. Oh, I do like... I say, Mr. Roy, what have you got there, Roy?
It's an inflatable canoe. I'm blowing it up.
Blowing it up? What harm has it done you? Put it down.
Put blowing air into it, you nut.
Oh, I beg it ever so puddin'. It's a bit small for you, isn't it?
It's yours.
Huh?
I thought you might fancy a jolly joust with the waves.
You're not getting me out in that. Oh, I'd get salt in me fur. And the waves, I mean to say, sit me up, turn me over.
You'll get your tail wet.
Brush, please. Do you mind? Brush.
All right, well, if you're staying here, I'm going to borrow a rubber dinghy.
Huh?
And if I get beyond the waves...
Beyond the waves?
I can have a nice swim.
A nice swim? You really... lifeguard! Lifeguard!
What's the matter?
If you swim away from a rubber dinghy, it could be swept away from you.
Oh, I see. And there I'll be.
Where?
All at sea. Boom, boom.
I do the jukes.
All right, then. I'll go and have a nice peaceful float on my airbed.
Just a minute. Hang about.
What?
I'll tell you something.
Yeah?
Imagine, there I am, lying on my airbed, floating gently up and down. Suddenly I raise my head.
And what do you see?
That's right.
What?
The sea. Boom, boom.
That's my joke.
You can have it. It wasn't very funny anyway. Water. No beach. The wind and tide have carried me out. Help! Help!
Are you trying to tell me that inflatables are dangerous?
Dangerous? Now, did I say that? Now, did I say...
Ah, you mean inflatables are safe if they're used properly.
Go to the top of the class. But don't go out on open water when the wind and tide can sweep you out.
And don't be tempted to go for a nice swim.
Wait, who's giving this information? That's right. And don't go out where there are waves to tip you up.
So what are you going to do then?
I thought I might potter over to the paddling pool and play with Horace.
Who's Horace?
My rubber duck. Come on, Horace! 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 You can't stand water, you know.
Ginger fairy.